is important, and not everyone is willing to speak to reporters. Oftentimes, stories are covered with mistruth, and it hurts the victim, family members, or whoever the story is about. Today, I am so proud to speak with Cherri Gregg, the Community Affairs reporter for KYW Newsradio. I can say personally that Cherri always tries to report the facts, and she is always willing to stand firm for what she believes is best for the community. Cherri just celebrated 10 years with KYW. Congratulations, Cherri. Welcome to the show. Cherri, tell me how you got started with KYW.
I got started at KYW while a student at Temple University. I was getting my master's in journalism and was introduced to Steve Butler. He was the head of programming at the time. And they told me they needed a night side overnight reporter to man the cage, as they call it, which is to listen to all the breaking news on the wire and everything. And I applied. He was like, why would you want to do this? But then I got the job, and I started. My first day was on January 11th, 2011.
All right. Now, do you work with other news stations?
Not really. I mean, we had an arrangement with Channel 3 for quite a few years. KYW and CBS 3 were longtime sister and brother stations. At one time, before my time, they were located at 4th and Market, and they were embedded together. Then the stations broke up. We were at 4th and Market. They were at 15th and Spring Garden. But then a few years ago, they decided to come back together, and we moved in with them. And we had a nice synergy going on. So you would see me on CBS 3 from time to time. And then I believe for a few years, I was a Sunday morning reporter. So every Sunday morning, folks getting ready for church, they would see me wherever I had to be from Sunday morning, beginning at about 5 a.m. until 9 a.m. So I had hours on back to back to back. And then I also did feature stories on air during the week as well.
Okay. All right. Now you hold a law degree. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay. So you thinking about going into that profession?
Yeah, I had a practice before I came to become a journalist. I went to Howard University School of Law right after I graduated college at Boston University. And, I got a job. I was top of my law class. I was on Law Journal. I know. And I went straight from undergrad to law school. And then I got a job working at a law firm in Atlanta, Georgia. And I practiced intellectual property law. So I worked with inventors. I worked a lot with people who own tech companies and they own trademarks. NASCAR was a big client of our firm. I remember going to NASCAR races and stuff like that. And I did a lot of stuff on the internet. So if we had people who would hack systems. Verizon was a client, and I was one of the folks who would track down these people, these hackers, through use of subpoenas and other technology, IP addresses. We track them down. And I did that for a couple of years. And then I moved to Philadelphia for a relationship, ended up, practicing law here for a couple of years. But then I was like, you know what? This is not what I want to do. I quit. After kind of going to graduate school for a little bit, while I was working, I went part-time at my law practice, and then I just decided to take the leap. And then a few months later, I got the job at KYW.
Wow. So that all worked out well. So let's talk about the stories that you cover. Do you choose those stories, or are they chosen by the station? And what stories are worth covering?
Yeah, well, it's a combination. And every newsroom is different, and every reporter is a little bit different. I'm what they call a beat reporter, which means that I cover certain issues or things. And that is my job, to tell the station what's important in these areas. And so I've been doing that for a number of years. I cover race, I cover marginalized communities. I also cover, women's issues, and I do human interest stories that defy stereotypes. I also cover like community conflicts, movements, and activism, right? So that's pretty broad. And so there are a lot of reporters. So sometimes other people may cover stories that fall within this beat, but I pretty much get to kind of choose the direction or what we tend to focus on when it comes to these types of things. I also cover like the Supreme Court and sometimes any major court challenges and civil rights issues that come down. And for the most part, I kind of select the stories that I cover. But it's also like if something comes down and my managers say, hey, we want you to cover this because it's a sensitive topic, we think you should cover this. And then I typically do. I don't tell them, no, I'm not going to do this.
Which is smart. That's smart.
Yeah, it's a combination. Some days I don't have nothing. And so I'll do something that they suggest. Other days, but most days I pretty much do have suggestions, and I don't always catch everything. And that's the other thing. You can try to be everywhere, but it's really tough. And so sometimes there may be 3 stories popping in my beat, and I can only do 1 or 2, and I need somebody else to do a 3rd or 4th. Especially when we were talking about a racial unrest. I mean, something was happening all the time, and sometimes multiple things. And so we have multiple reporters covering various issues, and you get burnout. Sometimes I just don't want to do it, and so someone else can pick it up to give me a break. And so that's kind of how it works.
Okay, I'm sure, because I've seen you at a few press conferences, like at the DA's office. So when I see you come, I'm like, oh, let me straighten up. Okay, Cherri's in the house. So let me straighten up, because I respect you and what you do. Mm-hmm. And I think that you try to cover stories and get the facts out there, which I think is so important for reporters, and not to report things mistruth or whoever the story is covered on. Now, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit our area, what were your thoughts? And did you do research first before you started to cover that story? Was it emotional for you? Because COVID produced so much anxiety and stress for so many people, including myself.
Yeah, well, I always do research before I report on anything. That's step number 1. So yes, I mean, I, like everybody else, knew nothing about this. I'm not a health reporter. And so I had to, have a basic understanding, but my focus was more about community reaction, right? So what I try to report on, I leave health to the doctors. I leave, side effects and science to those who are most skilled at that. And instead, what I was thinking about was, what is this pandemic, this unknown virus? How is it going to impact communities, right? And not just communities, but communities that people typically ignore or don't think about. So first thing I did was know that my people I know who own businesses, their businesses were shut down. Like, I'm thinking about the small businesses, I'm thinking about the moms, the kids whose moms will have to still go to work, but they don't have anybody to take care of them. So I'm thinking about all these things. I'm thinking about people's living conditions. Like, a lot of people were living, lots of people in the house, like some folks going in and out, like, how contagious is this going to be? What should you be doing? Mask or no mask? How are people accepting this? And another, and then also misinformation. Another part of my job was to counter misinformation. Like, there was this viral rumor that Black people could not get COVID-19 because of the melanin in our skin. And I saw very intelligent people who I follow on social media sharing this misinformation. And so I felt like it was my job to talk to doctors and to educate the community, the communities that I cover, about this topic. And so, yeah, you will never, Melany, one of the things you could say is if I speak it, trust that I verified it with at least 2 sources. Like, I'm not going to get out here and just start talking off the top of my head. That's not what I do. I leave that to people who are not journalists, who don't get paid to like, put information out there. And so I'm very careful about what I say. If I don't know, I will tell you that I don't know, and that's unverified information. And so I'm very careful. And I was even more careful during this pandemic, because people were running with false information, and literally it was a life or death situation many times. And so that's how I just kind of did things. And I started doing it on social media. When I would hear about something like, our check's coming, I would tell, say how much the check was going to be. If you were on Social Security, if you weren't, like, how much money, who could get it, who wasn't eligible, whether and how could you get your account information to them? Because paper checks were taking weeks. Right. To come. Whereas if you had your direct deposit information, and for some people, this was very critical, like time was of essence. How to get your PPP loans. I brought people on to help explain the process. And, a lot of Black folks got left out in the cold, a lot of Latinos, people of color, because their paperwork wasn't together. So when I was trying to tell them, get it together, this is what you'll need. And right. Just kind of walking people through the process. And those are some of the stories that I covered during the height of the pandemic. And then, of course, there was racial unrest following the death of George Floyd. And I was called into work on a weekend and spent the entire weekend on my feet in the streets, covering looting, covering protests, covering police interaction with community. I was even tear gassed doing this work. In West Philadelphia, absolutely, in West Philadelphia. And so, this is part of what I do. I was in the streets, but I will tell you, it was physically and emotionally like exhausting, because it was like everything. It was never like a day of rest. Every day was something. And usually we typically have slow news days to kind of balance it out, like on Friday where you're not really doing too much, but we did not have slow news days. Because you also got to remember, President Donald Trump was the president at the time. So every day was something, like even on the weekends, every day. It was crazy.
Well, that's deep that you were tear gassed. How often do you cover a story where your safety might become an issue?
It happens more often than you might think, because, especially if you're covering protests and large protests, it could happen. We typically don't have looting in Philadelphia. That was the first time I'd ever seen something like that up close. But I always tell people that I have very good spidey senses. I think it's one of the gifts that God has given me. And, I follow my gut. And I've always been like that. I grew up in Northeast DC, there were things that happened around me. And the second I felt unsafe, I would always leave. And I could tell you at least 3 occasions in my life where I left 5 minutes before a shooting, before some kind of altercation or something, a major arrest happened literally at the spot where I was like minutes before. And so I've learned to follow my gut. If I feel unsafe or I feel that tingle, I get out of Dodge, so to speak. But I never felt unsafe in Center City during the riots. I literally was videotaping and went live. I had a few thousand people watching along as I took them through what Center City, this chaos that was ensuing in Center City. And then the next day when I was in West Philly, even though I got tear gassed, I didn't feel that, anybody was going to attack me or that my physical body. I was actually shocked at the tear gas canister that came there. You know what I'm saying? Like that was actually shocking. But that did make me, move back and exit or whatever. But yeah, I mean, a lot of times when I used to work the night shift, if it was a crazy shooting or a police involved shooting, I've been on the scene of, where stuff was happening. I remember when there was that standoff a couple of years ago near Broad and I think it was Broad and Erie. that neighborhood where 6 police officers were shot.
Yes.
Yeah, it was like a standoff. I wasn't out there. I was working from the studio, but we had a reporter literally had to duck because bullets were flying, and so, this happens to us. A lot of people don't realize, but reporters are first responders. A lot of times we're right behind, police to a scene. When there was that train derailment few years ago, I happened to be working the morning shift that Sunday, and I had to cut from where I was and bolt down to the scene of the derailment. And I was in someone's backyard, literally a few feet away from a derailed train. And so, explosions could have happened, anything could have happened, but that's where we had to be. And so, yeah, that's happened more often, Melany, than I can probably even tell you, just being at scenes of crimes, being at scenes of major accidents, being in the mix of major protests and other demonstrations is just part of the job.
Wow. And I never even thought about that. You say that reporters are first responders. I never even thought about that, Cherri. So when you, as a reporter, go to these scenes, is law enforcement open to speaking with you or letting you through to the scene? What about the victims, or what about the person who the story is about? Do you find that they're welcoming to you?
It depends. Everything depends. I mean, the scene, it depends, whether or not law enforcement, we're treated in a lot of ways. We're given a little bit more privilege than the average person with the public, but not much more. And part of it is because they know we understand safety. They know we understand certain other things, when to stay back, what's public, what's not public. So a lot of times if we have relationship with law enforcement, they will let us get a little bit closer to the scene. Because I work in radio primarily, it's a lot easier for us to get closer than if I had a cameraman, which I work with cameramen when I do television. So having them have to come, it's very dangerous for them because they're blinded by, this 40 or 50 pound camera on their shoulder. They have it, got to remember, they have one eye behind a viewfinder and can't see on that entire side. And the other eye is just able to look in front of them. And so somebody could literally come up behind them and hit them, or they could miss something. And so that is a consideration as well. So if it's a dangerous scene, a lot of times, and they're carrying other equipment like a tripod and other things as well. So a lot of times you got to be careful how close you get, because you can't just break and run when you got a $30,000 camera with you. You know what I mean? So that's another consideration. But as a radio reporter, a lot of times I just go and get close, get footage with my camera, go live on my, on social media, do whatever. But they'll let you fairly close, but you gotta think about your safety. I remember one time I was covering the opioid epidemic in Kensington. And they were cleaning out the railroad track area over there. And you got to wear Timberlands because there were literally needles everywhere. And I had to wear Timberlands and long sleeve pants, long sleeve shirts, because there was mosquitoes and smelly things and all kinds of stuff. And I remember having a young journalist with me who was going to do a digital version of the story, and she had on flip-flops. And I was like, sis, what are we doing? What are we doing? She was like, well, I didn't know. I was like, girl, you about to get HIV. Yeah. You could get HIV out here. Like, we don't know where these needles came from. So I had an extra pair of boots, and she was wearing shorts. So I gave her my extra pair of high boots, and she put those on, and I gave her a sweater because it was hot outside. And her legs, unfortunately, were all like bit up by all the bugs. And I was like, you got to come ready. You got to come ready when you're reporting. I got like different outfits in the back. I got ski pants for the snow. I got high boots. I got hats. I got hair coverings. Like, we not out here playing. Like, we are literally first responders. People think it's a game and it's cute and it's whatever. Oh, you so cute, whatever. Honey, it's like 95, 96% of your work is before you even show yourself. And if
Wow.
you don't get that right, why are you even here?
Exactly. Yeah.
And most reporters know it's not a pretty job. Like you try to look cute in the middle of 98 degrees and a fire in front of you and your feet hurt or it's cold. It's not a glamorous job at all.
Okay. Now, I wanted to share something with you. I was actually doing something with the Germantown Info Hub. So they have different reporters who come around and they join our group and we talk. So one of my advocates at Northwest Victim Services, Shamika Moore, her son was murdered. He was 16 years old. And the mother of the shooter immediately went to the newspaper and was saying that her son was bullied by my advocate's son. At the end of the day, it was not true. And people would come up to my advocate and say, oh, your son was the one who was murdered. Oh, he was the bully. That hurt her to her core. But when she was with me when we were in this Germantown Info Hub, and there was reporters in all of the groups. And she was speaking about how important it is for reporters to get information correct because you hurt people when it's not correct. One of the reporters said, why do you care if what I report is not 100% correct? That hurt her so bad. And I just thought it was a shame, Cherri, because again, she had people coming up to her to say, your child was the bully. Oh, your son was the one that was murdered. That still hurt her to her core. So do all reporters share your ethics as far as it's so important to get the information correct, especially when you're talking about victims?
That doesn't sound like any reporter that I know works for a reputable news organization. Like, I don't know where this person came from. I don't know if they were an actual reporter or what. A lot of people report for a lot of different things, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a reputable news organization. And I think that, media savvy and discernment is very important. And I do think people make mistakes, you know what I mean? And that's one of the reasons why you have to be careful of the sources that you rely on. But we typically try our best to get accurate information. It's not like we run around here trying to promote inaccurate information. But, people need to understand, the way a story unfolds. We arrive at a scene. There are families there. They are making allegations about what happened. We don't know. The investigation is incomplete. All we can say is that, one of the shooter's family said that this happened. The family of the victim said that this happened. We were not there, so how do we know, right? And part of it is up to the victim's family or whoever knows that the information is incorrect to try to correct the record as well. But all we can say is what we were told. Right. Now you try to verify that, right? But then also we're under pressure because of the way police say certain things happen, and people always criticize, quote, journalists and the media because y'all only tell the police side. We don't know. So we try to include community voices as well, but community voices are not always truthful either. So, right. You cannot necessarily say that what this auntie said is true because she loves her kids. So of course she's going to defend, her child. She has an agenda as well. And so right. we have to be very careful of people's agendas. Everybody has agendas. Everybody's trying to manipulate, the way the story comes out. So I'm very careful. I'm very measured. I will say this woman says that this happened. We have not verified that information. And she said that this was the relationship between them. We have not yet spoken to the victim's family and ran that by them. But I'm just telling y'all what happened, because if we leave it out, then everybody's going to say the only person that y'all listened to was the police, because we get it from all sides. And everybody blames the media for everything.
Right.
For everything. The media,
Right.
y'all hurt my feelings. Well, you know, we did not intend to do that. But if I did, call me up and say, sis, you got it wrong. I want to tell my side of the story. Okay.
Right.
Absolutely.
Now, how do you get your information? Is like, what's public knowledge? Is names
on the website on a story, it links to the reporter's name. And a lot of times their social media handles and their email is right there on the story.
Okay.
It's very easy. It's not hard to find us. I mean, a lot of times you just get our name. If you have the story, you can find the reporter who wrote the story.
Right, right. Okay.
So now, pinpoint it, but to say the media, because people blame the media all the time. And I'm like, that's not my story was correct. I don't know who you're talking about, but they can't tell you. They can never tell you who did it. They just say blame everybody.
Right.
I'm like, get that clip and send it to them. Respond to it. Say it was wrong.
Right.
You know?
Now, how do you guys get like the information? How do you hear a story? You guys have like a police scanner, or like,
we do.
How do you get like the name?
We absolutely do have a police scanner.
Okay.
And then we call police. They have a public information officer. And they also send out press releases because they know all of us will want to know. We go to the neighborhood, old times, shoe leather, knock on people's doors. I've literally found witnesses by knocking on the door. And typically when the police and law enforcement are at a scene, the people, the different folks who were there or witnessed it are usually hanging around. You know what I mean? And you can see them, the police talking to them and crying or whatever. You just go up to them and say, what's up? And like, it does take training. I've gone to the Investigative Reporters Association. They have conferences where they literally teach you trauma-informed reporting techniques. So you can learn how to talk to people when they're in the middle of shock or they're dealing with trauma and things like that. And you also learn from trial and error, you know, like I remember I was in West Philly, I believe, or Southwest Philly, and there was literally a baby left on a porch in the middle of the night and the baby froze to death. And I had to go to that house the next day, you know what I'm saying? And I had to talk to the neighbors. And that was I was a very new reporter when that incident happened. And I remember the reaction and I remember being scared, like, having to go knock on the door and ask somebody something so sinister and sad and all of those things. And so it takes a special kind of approach, a special kind of person, and a special kind of courage and empathy and all of those things in order to approach somebody on what may have been the worst day of their lives.
Yeah. Well, Cherri, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. You have educated me. So now I know I have a first responder sister that's out there working and doing great things. Cherri, I thank you so much for joining me, and I really respect everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me.
Cherri, thank you so much for joining me today. I think you are doing great work, and I am so proud to know you. Strong, professional, and beautiful. Cherri Gregg is truly a role model to many Black and brown girls and women. And I would also like to personally thank the station manager, Tanya Ellis from LaSalle TV, for giving me the opportunity to host the Power of One show. It has been 1 year and 7 months ago, September 30th, 2019. And Tanya, thank you so much for my thoughtful gift, these wonderful flowers.